Welcome to the Major Project Podcast. I am your host, Orion Matthews, and in this pod, we are learning from the people that work on projects over $1 billion, trying to tease out the lessons and learnings from these big endeavors. And today, my guest is Travis Arlitt. Travis is a senior planning and field execution specialist. He has over 25 years in the capital project delivery, including 16 years on the owner side. Travis has supported some serious mega projects: Angola LNG, Wheatstone LNG, Chevron's Bigfoot, TLP, and the billion-dollar Superior refinery rebuild. And most recently, Travis has been working on the Santos Picus seawater treatment plant. And I'm really excited about what we want to focus on. We're going to talk about something that he calls, and I think is a great name, execution, realism, and progress truth. So that's grounding schedules in field reality and helping leadership make decisions before problems become really expensive. He is also the co-founder of Day One Model, which is a progress-based planning and forecasting approach built on basically his experience and some of that execution, realism, and progress truth. So Travis, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Orion. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, before we get started on talking about execution realism and all good things, maybe you can give us a little history about how you got into major projects, what excited you about going into the field, where you got your degree, things like that a little bit.
Sure. I grew up in a construction family and remember my great uncle had traveled construction and took my dad with him when I was a kid. And so I've always had that idea that it's a potential career, and went to A&M, actually started in computer science, which is your background.
Yep.
But I was also in the Aggie band in the Corps of Cadets, and I didn't quite come to terms academically at the time with that degree. And then I found out I didn't know they had a construction degree, and I switched to there and excelled, did really well and enjoyed that. And just started traveling to various project sites. It got started with the contractors, Morrison Knudsen, URS, Zachary, and then made the switch to the owner side in 2010, I guess. And worked a lot of Chevron projects, Shell, bit with Shell, Santos recently, and currently a little operator out of Perth that's doing an offshore Papua New Guinea platform and a production facility.
Nice. And so you're an interesting story from going from Texas A&M and then really traveling the world. It seems like you've got a lot of global experience. And I understand that was kind of your intent. Do you have any interesting kind of lessons or thoughts for the audience that is thinking about maybe going global? Or
remember I was on a project where we're the construction manager for Chevron, and I was with an EPC in Colorado, the Piceance, and I saw the owner side planner, and I just realized that's what I wanted to do. I went to another project with that EPC, Levy in New Orleans, but during that project, I kept a note card on my little kitchen island that said work for the owner, international. I listed my salary, and I just kept looking at that for a year. And right at the end of that project, I got the call that they needed a planner urgently in Angola for Angola LNG. That Chevron group I worked with in Colorado, I made a good name for myself, and they had an opening. And that's how I got over there, is rotational. And it was just so exhilarating to me to set foot in Africa for a big LNG. And I was OSBL, so outside of boundary limits, just housing developments and roads. But the main planner, he had his back-to-back went to a different project. So I got to fill in on the ISBL side, which is really cool, and learn quite a bit about how they operated. And yeah. Then, when you, in this world, you impress a project team or like a business manager, and they just take you with them as a known commodity, especially when you're going from domestic to overseas. They don't want to necessarily take a risk on an unknown. So that same project group brought me to Malaysia for the Wheatstone project in 2013. And that same project manager brought me back here in 2020 for the Santos job. So that's just that note card kind of led to those thin threads and just doing good work for the right people and some luck involved. And you kind of get what you keep your mind focused on.
Boy, that's powerful advice. Sometimes I imagine if you're working on a project and you're like, what's the point of this? Or this isn't where I ultimately want to be, but those little reputational wins follow you and then possibilities open up.
Yep, definitely.
Well, thanks for a little history. How about we get into it? I am super excited to talk about execution realism and progress truth because I think we should probably start with just defining it, but I think the words are really powerful. And can we deliver this? Can people get realistic about what's happening in the field? So maybe break it down a little bit. Like you've obviously done a ton of thinking, and then you even created this day one model to really try and iron that out and create a whole model around execution realism. So maybe you can start with sort of why is there a gap? How did you get passionate about solving it? And then what does execution realism, progress truth really mean?
That we could probably go back to that Colorado project for Chevron, and I gave them that realism. And from the contractor side, you don't usually have access in the way that I did to the client. And but that job, because we were their CM arm, I was able to talk freely with Chevron, which I took advantage of. But there's a tale of two stories going on at the same time that really highlight what was happening. And so I went to the field as my first field assignment as a lead planner, and it was a big compressor station with water sand separators. And then there's well pads that were built out with not compressors, but quite a bit of equipment, then interconnected with pipelines, and then, roads and infrastructure. So I had created this schedule, and my task was create the ubiquitous level 3 and then have 3-week look ahead meetings with these guys and make sure we're on schedule, the typical way you would do it. So here I am, I'm pulling these guys into this trailer, single wide trailer, I remember, and they'd been building these facilities since before I was born, some of them. And so here I was telling a pipeliner, hey, next week you got to dig a trench and then make sure you bed the pipe. And it was just, these guys were looking at me with blank stares. I remember it was off of I-70, and we lived west of the site in Grand Junction. We'd go through this real windy valley, kind of, heading towards Denver. And I just kept wanting to just keep driving all the way to Texas and just go back home. It was it was one of those, it just wasn't fun. But out of that experience, I was thinking, okay, I'm not really helping the project by doing these 3-week look aheads. These guys, without me here, they're going to build this compressor station. They're going to lay this pipeline. They know the order it all has to go in. They don't have to have me tell them, you need piles before you hit the foundations. So what can I do? And then I'd created my first progress system. I thought, okay, let's get under the schedule and start to tell these guys something that they might not know. We are committed to completing this compressor station on this date, and we're backing up where we're at now. And instead of, you need to lay your 8-inch gas line next week, it's, hey, Paul, whatever his name was, I know you're running a Microsoft project schedule for your guys. I support that. But right now you're installing 100 feet of pipe a day, but we have this committed date. You need to really be putting in 200 feet of pipe a day. Can we talk about how we can maybe do that? And I just did that throughout the whole site. But the first time I set that system up, it was a massive, what I call bow wave now. And is you're doing, say, 1% a week and you need to do 2% or 3%. And it was just a really shocking view of the project. And, but at the same time, I was getting that schedule I built audited by the corporate Chevron guy, and I was getting some bad marks because I didn't follow the best practices, I guess, at the time. Now my schedules get high scores because I know how to play the game, but back then I probably didn't know it as well. So here they're firing up literally the corporate jet to go have an emergency site meeting after I showed them the progress picture of this job and talk about what to do about it, while I was getting a pretty tough write-up on my schedule. So that was kind of the two things that were happening at once. I don't call it old. You need a schedule, but you need to understand your audience for that schedule. But if you don't have that underlying progress picture, that's what really gets the leadership engaged. If you can back up your milestones to progress. And so that was probably the first time that really got into, we call it now the Vital Four. It's your average pace when you get up, not at a micro level, but at a level high enough to where you're looking at, say, a full well pad in that case, or the compressor station. You don't bring in 50 civil guys and next week you go down to 22, then you go up to 50. You kind of follow a flow where you're ramping up these trades you get to that level, usually the unit level or the module level. And then you start to put the progress picture together, and you don't really need a schedule to give that schedule assurance. That's so I got a little off track. So that's your average pace. You pull back, you got to pull back a few weeks, 3 to 5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times people have that good day in their head, but that's not reality. And like in college, if you miss one of your 4 exams, you have a risk of not passing. And that's a lot the same way with production. So you have a good rolling average, you decide, and then you redistribute to the plan date. So you're not looking at a plan variance. The plan is now a date and a set of progress that's required to meet that date. And if your average pace is less than what's required, then you're pushing a bow wave. You have schedule compression. So that's the third metric, is that compression factor. And then you have an impact where if you let that progress, that end date move out, you equalize that next week required with your current pace. And so that's what we call a deterministic forecast. So it's quite different than probabilistic, because that leader can now see, okay, I see the bow wave, I see the equalized where we're heading at our current pace. And that really gets their attention. And then they do things like fire up that corporate jet and fly to Colorado to have an emergency meeting, where if you're going to do a probabilistic or a schedule quality score, you may not have the jet.
All right, I'm going to try and repeat this back to you, but I am a super simple person that,
Yep.
So let me give this a shot. Let's say that your plan, let's go to like a different metaphor here, but if you have a race car and, you're going around a track or whatever, and you have all these little micro moves you're doing to move around cars, blah, 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 and you got to make like 50 laps. You might have a whole plan in your head about how you're going to dodge in and do all these things. There's all this complicated stuff. We could call it like the schedule. But but you're like the RPM guy, where you're like, this is your velocity right now. And if you maintain this velocity, which is how fast you've been going around these tracks, you're going to lose. Like, you got to go around 50 times. And so we know there's all this other complicated crap, but we're going to, for now, what we're going to look at is, for the last 5 laps, you have gone this slow. And, I don't know why, or there's all these maneuvers and stuff. And that schedule sometimes gets in the way of that. Whereas you can just say, like, look, your velocity is not cutting it. And because of that, you're not going to make that final lap on time at this speed. And that kind of enables a different conversation. It gets you out of like a lot of those like weaving and dodging and all the complicated stuff that goes with having a massive tree of activities and interdependent activities, and really just cuts to the chase of like, what is your speed? And that's that wave concept you're talking about like a bow wave. Is that kind of, I mean, it's a terrible approximatation, but
No,
it's
it's
kind
perfect.
of a bit of what we're talking
And
about.
let's unpack it just a little bit further. And so one way to describe what we're talking about here, when you say planning and scheduling, it can mean 1,000. We had 5 different planners on this refinery job, and all of us had different roles. So it's such a loaded term. We're talking about strategic planning here, not tactical planning. So tactical is what you said, that cars doing its thing around the other cars.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens at a strategic level, the minute, so instead of normally, if you were thinking of it in project terms, you would say, okay, Mr. Race Car Driver, you're 10 laps in, and we thought before we started the race that you would be at 12 laps in. And so then they do some SPI calc and divide the 10 by the 12, and all the, then the race car driver gets a bit confused. Whereas if you just tell them your average pace is 170 miles an hour, but we need to pick it up to 175. That's a lot simpler and more actionable. And then you could show them, if you keep going at 170, you're going to be dead last because it's going to take you X amount of time. And what's also another component that you don't pick up when you're just doing variances, and this is critical. As soon as your bow wave becomes unequalized, it's not a linear process. If you have a fixed end date,
Right.
you have every period that goes by, you have less periods to spread it by and more volume it can, if you're not on top of that, it's going to build under you and you're not going to be aware of it. And then it's going to be a 2 or 3x bow wave. But if you can get your team sensitive to it and get that race car driver sensitive, that at lap 2, it's 170 was our goal. You're doing 169.8. And then he can maybe have that target in his head. And now it's not 170 anymore, race car driver, because we've been doing 168, 69.8. It's 170.2. And you keep them and keep the project dialed in from the beginning at that real sensitive balance of your strategic speed.
Well, and just to go tap on one other thing you mentioned, which is sort of like this, I don't know if it's a disconnect, but you were sort of talking about reporting at different levels within an organization. And I'd be curious about your thoughts on this, because as a data person, I have this theory that's totally unbaked about that. I think that there's something like quantum physics and like general relativity going on when you go through an organization where it's like everything works at this level, but as you try to roll it up, like the models break, right? So it's almost like if you're at the ground level working a project and there's an executive at the very, very top and they're like, here's what I want. I want every hour on someone's timesheet and every last activity at the bottom needs to roll up into some sort of dashboard for me. And I find that a lot of times, I mean, that can be done sometimes, but a lot of times you get this weird phase transition effect that happens at different levels of the organization. And you're trying to like manage these like problems related to just rolling it up. And it almost sounds like you've discovered something along those lines where it's like, let the tool set work for who it works for, but it's almost like you're plugging that executive layer, but you're sort of bridging it down to what's happening in the field and skipping the roll up part of that can get in the way of a conversation to actually just get some action done on a project.
Yep. Yeah, we're gently poking the established order here. So, we're not, that's just what we're doing. And I'd like for everybody to maybe think about the idea of rolling up a level 5 all the way to the level 1 and back down has never worked that great for me. You enter this kind of no man's land of that level 3. To me, level 3 is almost a no man's land, and that's our benchmark. And I found that doesn't do much good for the field guys, and it's really hard to report to the executive team. And then it's also a skill set, because I remember when I was working for URS, the really cool project controls director, Wayne, he said, it's always funny to me when these guys and gals come in and they always branch off into planning and schedule, or cost. It's almost it's a very clear branching of just the mentality. And a good strategic planner thinks very naturally at a higher level, and to ask that same individual to go detailed with field execution and then roll up to a higher level, it's a skills, it's just a gap there. And so there was a talk I heard once, and the guy, I think of this often, he said, the truth is rarely in the middle. He said, it's always lying at the extremes. And I think that's a principle that could work within capital projects, where you do your detailed work for the people that really need to understand that. And then you translate that, of course, that's all data you use, but it's not a rolling up or down in my general experience, or what I found that works.
Well, so if it's not up or down, maybe there's like side to side. We're like deep into metaphors here, but there's sort of like forecasting, and then there's sort of like what really happened, and then there's like progress planning, forecasting. It seems like a lot of progress curves, they have, here's where you were, here's the future, this is what we hope, this is a best guess. How do you actually get a realistic picture on your forecast then? It sounds like what you're saying is don't worry about what you plan to do. Instead, look at what you have done and roll it forward. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the fundamental building block of everything I've done on projects that have moved the needle from a strategic standpoint. You take that plan variance, that normal chart that we're looking at, and we're anchoring to that plan. But like Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And so what really is happening under the surface of that plan, where you've created this static picture and you're punching in your actuals and you're measuring the variances, and that's effective, but it really doesn't show the whole story. And so what you can do is take that picture, and on it's a free app called goforward.dayonemodel.com. You can take that static chart, and so you've done all this work. It might be 1,000 or 10,000 activities that's created a plan profile. So that all you do is, if you want to get people's attention and you're behind plan and that variance just isn't doing it, you just keep two components from that entire S-curve, or whatever you want to call it, histogram. You take your actuals by period, and you take that profile in front of the status state. And you have to know what's remaining, which you would. And so you sum up those remaining bars in your plan. And let's say the remaining bars sum up to 100,000, but you have 150,000 remaining. So that you just take that, however many periods you have, let's just say 20 periods or 50 periods to keep it simple. You have a year left, and you need to add 50,000 units onto that plan. You just add 1,000 hours to each of those, and you just grow that up, and you compare that to your actual pace. And now you're going to see if you're pushing a bow wave or not, using the same exact data. But you look at everything from a go forward basis, and you don't necessarily you don't go backward. The plan can be a little bit lagging, and it doesn't drive urgency. It doesn't drive action. I mean, that's the whole point of what we're doing, is to cause the leaders to understand that there could be a problem And if you're doing a go forward redistribution, I'd expect that you're gaining minimum 3 months, probably 6 to 9 months on those key decisions. I mean,
So is that where day one came from? Thinking about like day one is like you throw out the past and you're just looking forward in a way.
yeah,
Is that
yeah,
unconstrained?
I was in Batam, Indonesia, at just having breakfast at. They've got a really nice 5-star Marriott that we stayed at, and I was down there just watching the sunrise. I think I was watching a podcast with Jeff Bezos and Lex Friedman, and Jeff Bezos was talking about. And I didn't know I was working with a consultant. I didn't know what to call this model. I'd come up with some names, and none of them really sounded that great. And then Jeff Bezos said, when you get into a day two mentality, it leads to stasis, it leads to death, and you begin a slow decline downwards. He said, you always have to keep a day one mentality. And I thought, that's exactly what we're doing. You're standing in that status state, and you're looking, every status state is a fresh day one, because if you're under or over, that redistribution is going to change. It's always changing. It's fluid. And if you don't capture that fluidity, and you're looking at more of a static day two type plan, you're going to get bit on those decisions, because you're going to have to make them after that plan is deviated enough in a day two world where they're going to be expensive to make. They're going to surprise you. And that day one fresh mentality keeps you really locked into those bow waves, that production discrepancy, and you're like in the Beautiful Mind movie, he said he's going into the governing dynamics of physics, or, what he was doing. I always look at the schedule, but the governing dynamics of all that logic is a progress picture. And you got to get under and into that progress picture if you're going to get ahead of those tough decisions.
All right. So let's say, just to kind of continue your thought here, let's just say I'm in charge of progress for a multi-billion-dollar project. I'm listening to this podcast and I'm like, Travis has some good points. But first of all, like, I'm very busy. So I'm going to obviously, like, I guess there's a couple components. One is you're talking about a mindset shift. And so that mindset shift has to permeate people above you if you're this progress planner. And so let's say that you're listening, you're like, I got it. I get the day one model. I like it. I'm going to do that, but I'm also going to probably run my own thing in parallel. How do you make the case? What do you tell that person? Is it like, do it on the next project? Or is there a way to incorporate this into your sort of practice in a sort of, I don't want to use the word easy, but like in a realistic way? Like, how do you do that? And then how do you sell it to other people and like help change their perspective?
Yeah. You have to do your core job extremely well. You have to have that under wraps. And only then can you dip your toe and start experimenting in stuff that's beyond that core job function that people brought you on to handle. And the first time in Malaysia is a module yard, and my job was quantity surveyor. So assurance for Chevron that these modules and the progress. So it was kind of a natural. It was the only position that the business team hadn't filled, and so we all did, and it was a site role, and but if you're in the position of the planner, and what I used on that job was Primavera level of effort activities. I called it my fertilizer spreader, and so I just asked the contractor to provide me progress of all the major components. You have to keep it at a manageable level. So that's the first step. And it depends on what you have access to, if you're on the owner side or the contractor side, and who your audience is. If you're on the owner side and you're not getting any data, you're going to have to, I've never been one to just sit on the bench. You got to grab drawings and go do field walks and takeoffs. That's the worst case scenario. But you can usually tease out quite a bit of data from what you're getting. Of course, if you're on the contractor side, you have all the data in the world, but you get it out of the nuts and bolts. So that takes a lot of time to manage to that level. But if you take it to this pipe spool level, the steel piece level, the piece of equipment, your instrument index, your cable schedule, and I pretty much covered it. You don't have to go because your pipe spools cover your insulation and your heat trace. Cable schedule has all your power and fiber and all that, the different cables you're going to have, instrument, electrical, instrument index has your instruments, and then steel pieces would have your fireproofing. And on a major industrial job, the equipment, and then you have buildings, HVAC. I mean, all that stuff can just be componentized. And so you've kind of covered it on a major industrial job. And then you just earn that progress back. But so yeah, you do your day job really well, and then you might do a redistribution, use a Primavera level of effort if you don't have if you're really a true resource loaded P6 schedule, if you're keeping it updated, it'll show that bow wave if you just report it out appropriately and you're not just pulling in your actual. So you can start there.
But then okay, so let's say I did that, Travis, and I'm like, okay, I've got this P6 printout that then I put in Excel to make it look pretty, whatever. I've got a PowerPoint and I'm going into a meeting with the project director. How do I what do I tell them about this new thing that I'm doing? Like, how do you explain what you're doing to people that aren't familiar with these concepts? Like, where do you get that mindset shift with your boss?
It's something I'm still learning to do, to be honest. I was talking with a gentleman last week, and I thought we had covered day one model and the whole idea of it months ago, and we hadn't. I'd made some assumptions, and what I did was what worked. I had on that app. You can see I think it's how it works, but there's 3 charts. So we just scrolled up and down these 3 charts for 30 minutes, and it sunk in. So you would have to take them from where they're at, what they're used to seeing. Here's your variance chart. You can see we're 10% behind plan. We know this isn't good. The contractor's saying we're going to pull that line up. That's what they always say. Love them, but that's the story. And it's very easy to say in a meeting, especially if the progress chart's 2 or 3 inches tall. You can just point and say, yeah, we've got some things going on. Story. Because of this, by the time this project's done, we're going to pull that line up.
Yep.
And you tell that to the project director, and you have a relationship. This is all relationships. And then you say, but we take this data. If you look at it in a different way, the contractor needs to do 50% more progress next week just to achieve the plan date that they say they're going to meet. And that's exactly what that chart showed. And then there's not much talking anymore that you can do. Then you got to call people in and say, and they might not agree with it. And then now you can start talking. Okay, you don't agree with the 50% increase. What's wrong here? Now you can say, okay, we're going to sum up these bars. Damn it, that's our remaining budget. He's right. This is our profile. We got to have some time for ramping down. We have a holiday coming up. So this is a profile. These are our actuals. There's not a lot you can talk about at that point that's going to be story-based. It's going to be action-based because it's so in your face. And so that's and you don't have the plan in there. And one comment I think is very key is that I've just recently come to think about is I told this to the project director, and he said, well, my board's not going to let me ditch the plan. And that's not what we're doing. The plan is now reframed. So, Mr. Project Director, we've been framing the plan as this variance to this static monument. We're going to reframe it to this date. It's still the same plan, but now we're going to look forward from the status date and see what we have to achieve to make the date. That's maybe an alternative view of the plan that we ought to add into our normal stuff, because there's a massive momentum, and you have to, I'm learning more how to communicate. You have to communicate from what is a known and kind of branch out. But like on that that module yard, when I showed that director how I communicated it, once I call it the magic 6 weeks. You create a system if you don't have any progress, and you just get the pace. So you're getting the speedometer revved up. And then you do your redistribution. I used the level of effort bars. And so when I showed my business manager who ran it through, he's like, let's go talk to the director, Mike. I put this AO size plot, overall pipe insulation, and they're just all pushing major bow waves. I didn't have the sophistication to flatten them, but you knew there was trouble. And I said, if you do the math, we're going to do train 1 modules. Some of these were the size of a football field. We're going to move those off and do train 2 modules for this LNG. And that bow wave showed that just wasn't going to work. We had a 10,000 line item activity schedule. We had dozens of progress charts. We knew things weren't right. We had variances. But it wasn't until that director saw that in-your-face view of, you need to do 2 times the production you're doing to meet our plan, that he could clearly see that Train 2 module program was in dire straits. I remember him pulling in the Bechtel leadership for 2 or 3 weeks, and they were just pointing these charts, and it was very direct conversation. And then they punted. They said, okay, we're going to move about 20,000 tons of modules to a different yard down the road. So we're going to get some major Train 2 modules out of here so we can focus on Train 1, and we're not going to impact this Train 2. But I always say they would have made that decision eventually. They were probably even talking about doing that. But when you see it, the urgency gets amped up tenfold, and that's what you need. It's uncomfortable, and you don't just go spewing it to the world. You got to keep the confidence of the people that you need to keep the confidence of. But it's your job as a planner to have an uncomfortable conversation with that person that you need to have with, and not everybody, that one guy or gal, that chain of command that needs to pull a lever and needs to pull it fast, and they may not have any real understanding of what that means.
Yeah, I like that. Having uncomfortable conversations. And you said it's the 6-week magic. Was that right?
Yeah, you can't tell how fast a project, one of these, major projects,
Mm-hmm.
it has a pulse and a pace to it. So you're looking at a project for, say, 2 or 3 weeks. You're only going to be able to get, if you have 3 periods, I found 3 isn't enough. So you want a rolling average. You want to get 6 weeks, gives you a really solid pace of a typical 1.5, 2.5, 3-year industrial size project. When it's up and running, that's it. You want to get some good history, and that 6 weeks is how you do it. That's how I've done it.
Kind of along these lines, because we're talking about progress, but there's different ways to measure progress, right? Like when you're in the field, my favorite way is definitely not to do it based on like cost, where you're just like, everything's a fixed price job, and we'll just kind of like measure the relative size of every job. And when we pay out the contractors, then that is our progress. And we'll just forecast forward whatever is remaining in the budget. Like that's kind of what it's going to be. And we'll plan to pay these people at these dates. And that's the variance, right? So you have sort of like cost-based, you have unit accounting. Mm-hmm. And then I think you always end up with some sort of mix, oftentimes it seems, but I don't know anything about this. Maybe you can share what you see as like the ways of actually measuring progress and preferences on rules of credit and things like that.
I was on that Corps of Engineers job, and there's an EVMS, government EVMS, and I remember thinking, And these guys are, I did not like the idea of measuring progress with cost, which is how the government does it. And it just doesn't, if you want to know when a project's going to complete and where your progress pinch points are, you should probably keep cost out of the mix. That's my opinion. And so how I do it is I keep about 40 to 50 unit rates in my pocket, and I've shared them on LinkedIn if anybody wants them. Usually what they call the Gulf Coast norms kind of get you in the ballpark. And it's just how many work hours you go down to the direct work hour. That'll get you a really solid progress picture. And so it's say 25 work hours per cubic yard of concrete. And you might say 25 for a spread footer or a big monolithic pour, and maybe 30 or 35 for a pier because there's more work to do that. And you have these ranges: large bore pipe, small bore pipe, exotic pipe, GRE pipe, normal carbon, piece of equipment, how many work hours per ton. And so you just quantify the job in that level. And so that way, and on that Colorado job, I didn't know how to do this. I mean, I called my project controls manager in Houston because this is a tip I'd like to just to throw in the middle of all this. That this was in 2008. I was in the Houston office, and I had just gotten done with a little cabinet shop experiment, and I was eager. I was really glad to be back in the work, and my controls manager. I mean, this is bustling work. The office was full, work was everywhere, and he couldn't find anybody to go to the job site. I heard him talking for a while, and he complained to me maybe, and eventually I got up the courage. I said, Donnie, I'd love to go to Colorado if you can't find anybody else. They're paying $214.50 a day per diem, 50 hours a week on my normal 40. And I thought it was a gold mine. And why didn't anybody else want this? But so within a few weeks, I was heading to Colorado. But and then the bottom fell out pretty much shortly after I got there. And all the people in the office, their jobs were far less secure than if you were supporting a field assignment. So that aside, I called Donnie from Colorado, and he said, it's work hours, Travis. You got to roll. I said, how do you get steel to talk to pipe, to talk to equipment? He said, you just assign that unit rate. And so now you may not need a unit rate if all you're looking at is one commodity, say concrete. At that point, you can roll up how many yards of mud you've actually poured, how many tons of rebar you've actually tied, how many square foot of forms you've set and stripped. But embeds. But if you're going to get that group of work to talk to your whole project and roll it up and down, then you have to use that common denominator of work hours, and then your major components have a unit rate, and then you're earning back progress. And that's kind of I just saw a post on LinkedIn this morning about how important it is to keep completions in that progress mix. So in that Colorado job, my very first system, it was very uncomfortable. It hit 95% and just stuck there for 3 to 6 months, and I didn't know what I did wrong. And what I did wrong was I followed everybody's advice. You get all your credit up front and 10% on that final sign-off sheet. That doesn't work. That even the big guys, I know their rules of credit. They're all weighted in the same way. And you have to buck that trend, and I don't die on many hills. I usually adapt to whatever the contractor's best practices are, and we fit within that. But one that I will throw up a little bit of resistance on is I would like to keep 30% of the progress bucket for that final sign off, that torque sheet or that check sheet or that final walk. And then they're incentivized to complete in your work in progress, the lean manufacturing, the lean crowd, the construction guys, the production. They read books about work in progress, and that kills your project more than you would ever imagine it would. And so if you keep an incentive on completing these smaller components, you keep your work in progress down, and then your progress system just kind of finishes normally. So that's kind of the keys. You roll it by work hour. You keep it by the major component level that you can actually quantify. A piece of steel has so much tons. How many tons of steel, hours per ton is it to install that? Tertiary ladders and platforms have a much higher rate than a beam, a primary beam, or then in the middle there you have your secondary supports for pipe, etc. But so yeah, that's your system. If you can get to that system, project predictability is in your pocket, and there are varying degrees of success that you're going to have getting the data you need. But if you can get to that level, you're going to be able to make it boring, predictable.
So let me play it back for you from my sort of 101 brain.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to build, let's say I'm building a house, and I have a bunch of lumber that I need, and concrete has to be poured. Like those are the main pieces or something. Yep. And maybe electrical stuff has to go in. We'll just look at that. So I'm going to calculate out, I have this much lumber, whatever, 1,000 units of lumber coming in, or X amount of pallets. And then I also need to pour this much concrete. So those are like my X and Y variables. And then you also overlay the number of hours, total man hours you have like available capacity wise to get a run rate on that. Is that right? So you're sort of like, okay. And then you take the averages from your LinkedIn or other places. You say, all right, well, this is how quickly people are going to be laying down lumber to build houses. Should be X amount per day or per hour, whatever. And this is the total manpower that you have on your project. Like, here's the manpower plan. And then you sort of do the math there with the averages to kind of figure out like, okay, well, they're laying it I'm at this point, and then the way I'm going to record progress is by looking at like, here's the historical average for this region, and here is like how we're doing and where we need to come up to. And then it also kind of enables the conversation. So your lumber guy, you're like, this is how much we need to move. This is what we've seen in other regions. And then sort of apply the same thing to your concrete person. And then at some point you roll it all up with like a lowest common denominator, like you use math to kind of roll all these things together to get you sort of a progress percent. Is that roughly what you're talking about?
Yeah,
there?
Before you start a project, I found that historical data can get you in the ballpark, or it might be totally off. Projects are unique beasts, especially these big ones. And but in the case of the house, you take a good estimate. You take a stab at it before anything's done. So it's going to take you 25 work hours per cubic yard. And that includes your rebar mat and your pouring and your finishing and your stripping. And if you have, say 100 cubic yards in that house foundation, so there's your 2,500 cubic hours to do that pour. You grade it, you form it, you get 20% of that. You tie the rebar, do all your embeds, your anchor bolts, that's another 40%. And you don't get much when you pour because if you think about it, it's just a one-day event. Then you get a little bit to strip. And so now you're earning that back. And you might say, okay, 2,500 hours, Mr. Concrete guy, you have 30 days to do this. And then you can start to say, okay, you're going to need, I don't know the math off the top of my head, but let's say it's 10 people. Can you get 10 people here? And so now you got your start of the plan. Now, as soon as they start to execute or deliver that, then, and then for you'd say 2x4s, like you're saying, 1,000 2x4s, 10-foot 2x4s. It's going to take you 5 hours per 2x4 to cut it and get it framed up. And so there's your 5,000 hours. And now the concrete and the lumber is talking to each other. Maybe they're off to the side, putting together trusses or walls, getting ready while the concrete's going. And so you can understand how the whole thing's rolling up. But if they get started, and let's say there's 4 foundations, so you can start to see how it's going on an aggregate basis. And this is where performance index is incredibly important, because you're never going to get that new a project's like a brand new car. You don't know how fast the thing's going to go. And people might think you do, but I've seen projects and even contractors in the same part of the world on the same project have vastly different unit rates. It just happens. And so that's another thing about the day one mentality is you're 30% into your concrete. You tied rebar here, and you're getting a good gauge of how many people, what your production is. Let's say you're doing better in one, but you're doing worse in the other. You got to factor that into your go forward at all times and say, okay, Mr. Concrete Guy, we thought we're going to need 10, but we're a little bit into this. We're starting to push a bow wave, and I'm saying at your current productivity, you might need 15. Can you get 15? And no, we don't need 15. Okay, let's talk it through. And now you got all the data to talk it through. Maybe he's right or she's right, or maybe the data is exactly spot on, and you have an intelligent conversation and you're not just saying, oh, you're 4 days behind plan, go faster. It's far more specific than that. And so you keep track of that performance factor, and density is something you want to consider. And I think we put density in too much of a context, because I've seen good performance from people, especially here in Asia. It's shocking how many people can get work done in a density calc that would completely blow any metric you're trying to use out of the water. I mean, I was an integration planner for a Bigfoot tension lake platform, and I remember watching the videos of the hull in South Korea, and it's like ants. So you got to be a little bit like, don't base your plan off of density. It's one good gauge. But the most important thing, and that's why if you are only looking at that plan and not looking at how this particular project in this particular environment is actually doing, this contractor even, and pushing that forward with a solid what-if scenario. And what if we continue with our current productivity? That's a huge one. Then you're going to get caught behind the curve. You're going to get in that day two mentality.
Well, okay, let's talk about that behind the curve. So I think I've seen stats that say 98% of all projects are off schedule or off budget. You're sort of you might be the person I've talked to that has the most grounded view of what's really happening reality-wise for projects. But why this sort of like, what am I trying to say? Why is schedule optimism so persistent in our space? Why is progress misrepresented so often? What's going on? Is it cultural? Is it systems? Like, you've been on the owner side for decades. Like, what do you think is the root causes that?
The root cause, I try not to be I don't want to throw rocks or anything. Okay, so let me try not to throw rocks, but a big root cause is it's fairly easy to misrepresent what's going on when you're looking at a 10,000 line item schedule, and that nobody quite understands, but that's your basis for everything. I've been the guy behind the box, and I can make that schedule tell you whatever you want it to. And generally, if I'm with a contractor, I'm going to make it suit the contract. And so you have the contractor who it's all there, that book Freakonomics, the whole premise of the book in the beginning, like you open the book and it says incentives are the cornerstone of modern society. And so, of course, it boils down to incentives. And if a contractor doesn't have the incentive to really get transparent, I mean, if I was for the contractor and I showed data in this redistributed manner, the same data that we are giving the client, but I'm making it more direct, they'd probably show me the door. And so you gotta handle this directness with a little care. But it's just extremely easy to talk about stories. And even from the owner's side, unless there's a regime change, which happens all the time, that's your window of time to really pop in some realism, because they want it. But if they've been running this job for a year and say you come in, it's not necessarily in their best interest for you to show a 2x bow wave, because they've had their hand on the wheel for a year and they didn't see this yet. And so it's just, there's a lot at stake, both. And a lot of times, and I've been there, where you get behind, everybody knows we're behind from the top down. There's a good chance something's going to happen that you can pin a lot of stuff on. And so the incentive to come clean early is less, because, we had this procurement issue and look at what it did to us, and so that's happening, and these projects have all kinds of moving parts, and you can disproportionately have a sacrificial problem. And so I don't know if it's the Eagle Scout in me or what, but I just can't help myself, no matter what the incentive is, if I'm not reporting the absolute truth as I can see it to the person in charge of the decisions, I won't sleep well at night. So you gotta love that part of it. But yeah, the incentives, and people can unfortunately get into bad situations whenever you really expose something that nobody has seen before. And so the closer you are to who needs that product, the closer you are to who's got the financial benefit, that's where they don't care quite so much about the story and all that. Yeah, I just heard a story a few weeks ago. There's a major consulting firm on a major project brought in a schedule assurance company. They worked for a month on the schedule, tying up all the loose ends, making it quality, doing the Monte Carlo simulation. Came up with a date. A week and a half after they left, gave the owner this date. The project director came clean and he said, "Sorry guys, that's not it. We're actually a year and a half past that date, past your P90." And everybody had egg on their face, because you're not in the governing dynamics. You're in the logic and stuff, and anybody can make that tell whatever story they want. So I don't know what caused that director to come clean. Maybe he just knew his time was up, and people were going to find out eventually something. But there's a lot of, I don't know if that answers the question, but because it's pretty, and a lot of times these teams get dealt a bad hand from the beginning. Most of the time, let's say that date, like as a scheduler, nobody's ever said, "Hey, Travis, put this schedule together and tell me when we're going to finish this job." It's always, "You're going to finish this job at this point," and you're building the plan around that, and that's okay. But that's why I always go down to the progress picture, because I got tired of having people tell me they're going to catch up, and as soon as I got into that, I said, "Okay, catch up." That means, like on that pile driving job, you've been driving 14 piles on average per day per rig. You thought it's 20, but look at your rolling average, and they look at it and you can't dispute. You need to do 20 per rig per day to make your plan. So tell me how we're going to catch that up. And it's no longer a variance. It's very direct. And we're in charge of billions of dollars. You got to take it some sort of a personal responsibility and present that data in the most direct way that you know how. And that's kind of how I look at it, but that's just personally how I look at it.
Play that back for you. What I heard you say there is game theory related stuff, which is that, yeah, incentives drive everything. Right. Leave it to an economist that wrote a book about it to go back to incentives being the core of reality, but they have a good point. And then when you look at these mega projects, billions of dollars, so you have individual incentives, careers, you have owner side incentives, financial, you have contractors, financial incentives, you have probably a myriad of other like incentives that are competing into this soup, and it's very difficult to navigate it. And maybe the way I would think about it is it's like if somebody gives me advice about how to survive high school, I'm not going to tell them like, well, go to this group and tell them one story and be this way to them, and then go to another group and like do that. And just like whatever anyone wants to hear, just tell them that. And you're going to do great in high school. People are going to love you. And that's not true, right? Like that's a recipe for later disasters. Like, and I think maybe that's part of that is that humans don't like conflict and they want to succeed. And so you have all these like misaligned incentives, and then you have probably, I like the saying, assume positive intent. So I think even when you have all these positive intents at play, you still can end up with that toxic outcome because people want to avoid conflict, and those little micro avoidances bubble up, and before you know it, like you have to bring a story to someone that really is a very unfortunate situation where people are going to lose jobs or there's going to be real impact, and humans don't like to face that. And so it's kind of like in high school, if you were like talking to all these other groups, lying about things and kind of weaving all these things, which lots of kids end up doing because it's a very natural strategy, survival, that can come crashing down on you at some point. And so I think that's like maybe that happens with projects because projects are groups of people. And so it's like those social dynamics and situations just sort of aggregate into an eventual like reality shift that has to occur. And then, like you said, it's like someone brings the story at the perfect time to slay the problem. That's actually all a lie. It's just a totem for like all this other stuff that happened that you don't want to deal with. And you just have, but in order to share the story, it's like you have to have a ritual to blame something and vanquish the foe.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, that's kind of what I heard from you.
That's accurate. And it's, there's something I had, but it is difficult. Oh, what I was going to say was, kind of my message when I'm delivering some of this is, or just that reality, it's there whether you're acknowledging it or not. And eventually it's going to get you. So you are infinitely better acknowledging it early. I mean, not even close to orders of magnitude better. If you can just face it, everybody gets on the same page. That's kind of I'm a little optimistic, I guess, that if everybody got on the page at kind of the redistributed view, the production-based view of the project, and understood what's going on from the contractors to the subs to the owner, we would have far better outcomes because you can address problems far earlier. And it was funny. I was chatting with a 40-year Chevron guy that took him 10 years to get from a planning, scheduling, normal project controls into more of a production view of things. So that kind of gave me a little resilience in my heart. Okay, it's just going to take time to get this idea out. But he said they found that train 2 of an LNG, when you're doing, say, 2 trains, you expect train 2 is going to go by faster because you got it all worked out. He said it's the opposite. He thinks it's because people know that there's no train 3 after it, and so they're just they want to keep the job going. They may not know, not even know it consciously, but there's a lot of dynamics going on projects that are hard to pin down.
So do you think that AI might change this for us? I mean, if you think about the dispassionate observer of reality, is that potentially a way that AI could change the game? Or what do you see kind of coming up from a technology perspective?
I've changed my views even in the last month on that as far as what it can do to help planning and scheduling.
Wow.
I was kind of not necessarily for it, but it can really do a lot of the heavy lifting. The problem that I can see is for a project leader to take a decisive step that could be a career problem for him or her if it's not the correct one. They need to have a really clear picture of why and what and dependable. I mean, just as an example, through distribution and showing and what a potential carryover picture could look like, a director signed a $5 million incentive bonus on a project. And it was the right move. It liquidated $50-60 million worth of work. But I remember at the end of the job, a year and a half later, we were having to dig up the backup to that, why he did that, and it wasn't a good or bad. It was just part of the process. And so, I mean, I use AI. If somebody took it away from me, I'd hunt them to the end of the earth to get it back. I've used it with Day One Model, that app on the web. I built a web app based on an Excel version and a few prompts. It was just like a miracle. I even had it help me with schedules. And but you always got to get back to the defensible. It just can't be a black box output. So you either get to where you really, really trust this AI and the analysis it's giving you, because there's no way you're going to be able to get into the head of it's got such an advanced reasoning skill that, that's kind of where my head's at. It can do a lot of heavy lifting for us, and we should use it as much as we can to do that heavy lifting. But
what happened?
You need to understand what's coming out of it. Yeah.
But you said the last month you've changed. Like, what happened? Because GPT 5.4 just came out, Claude as well. I mean, there's been some really big model shifts. OpenClaw. Like, were these the things? Like, what was your moment where you sort of had a bit of a change?
I'm tasked on this. Yeah, the models have just gotten crazy better. I tried to do some coding work, and I'm not even close. I've used a developer to do Day One Model, but we decided to kind of let it sit where it's at, and because it's expensive, and as we get customers and revenue, then we'll start to improve it. I'm the chief product officer, and I saw so much I wanted to do, so I just decided, okay, hey, Claude, what can we do with this? Oh, we can do this. Just upload the code here. Okay. I've done this 400 times now. Prompts. I've written 60,000 words of prompts and really understood how it works from using that code base. But beyond that, so developing this execution schedule, you have a lot of documents, and you can do an API. So you're sectioning off the data privacy issue. So you don't have to worry about that with Claude. And you probably know more about this than I do, but so you create your own little workspace, and you can feed, instead of sifting through these bid docs and picking out the calendars and all the stuff, you can say, hey, okay, this is everything I know on the project. This is a level 1 I've built. This is a straw man I have. This is what Bob down the road did on the project schedule. I'm going to feed you these 12 documents. Give me a good list of activities. And this is a work breakdown I see for this schedule. give me a good list of activities. We don't want to miss anything in these bid documents. And it gets you that instead of spending days and weeks, you get a very, very distilled view of the plan. So that's what's changed. I actually used it. And so you have, I've met Alan Melska once with InPlan, really cool guy. And there,
Oh yeah.
for a while, I was like, you can't do, like I said, I was not anti, I guess, but just, I didn't see, but now I'm starting to see, okay, these guys can really help do a lot of the heavy lifting. You have the nodes and link. I've never met him, but he's just come up with something that looks pretty cool to help do a lot of the schedule grunt work. And so, and you're not having to take a lot in faith because, okay, Claude, you said we need to do X component on this platform. Show me in the contract what page that was. Boom, boom, boom. And so you can do the research and you can get down to the good first pass. I completely backed into this is another exercise I did. I used all three models at the time I found a replication of a combined cycle power plant. And I had the models help me dial in the quantities and so I created a progress picture from model shots in kilowatt or megawatt output from these models. And I was able to get what I was a pretty good schedule going from a model shot. So anyway, there's a lot of power there. You still have to show those key decision makers that fundamental level about what you're talking about and not necessarily rely on that output. But there's a lot of advantages to the distilling of data.
That's a powerful story. That last note you made, that's something I think about a lot. There's that 4 quadrants, like, what you know what you don't know, and then you don't know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. And it's always like, okay, if you focus on the whole don't know what you don't know, that's the classic. I'm 9 years old and I absolutely know how to load a dishwasher. Then they put the wrong soap in or whatever, right? They didn't know what they didn't know. And I find with AI, I think there's something to those quadrants and where it acts as a force multiplier. It's like, if you don't know what you don't know, I'm not sold yet that AI is going to be your 100x multiplier. It might give you a little bit of a boost. It's good at, but it's might kind of maybe help you avoid some errors, but it might also lead you down the wrong path because so you don't want someone doing surgery on you that doesn't know how to do surgery using AI, I think. And then it's sort of like those other two where it's like, if you know what you know, AI is like 1,000x productivity. And then if you know what you don't know, it's also a huge lift. So if you're like, I don't understand this, I know that I'm not good enough at this space, but now you can have a much more informed conversation about what you're looking at and it will work with you and you can kind of speed that up. So it seems like that's part of what you were saying there as a cautious warning, right? It's really like an accelerant, but you do still have to know what you're talking about.
Yeah. If I would have taken that first pass at the schedule I'm building, it would be the project team would look at me like, are you an idiot? Because it just, you have to know what you're doing when you're using AI. You can't come at it. And like when I was doing that combined cycle power plant, this has definitely got 50,000 tons of steel in the pipe rack. And are you sure? That seems like a lot of steel. You have to have, oh, you're absolutely right. It's actually 5,000 tons. I was off by 10. And that happened a lot. And so you definitely have to keep on your toes. It can sound extremely confident for stuff. And if you take that confidence without knowing the fundamentals, you're going to get bit for sure.
Well, so we've talked a lot about the day one model and AI now. Thank you for that. Before we shift a little bit to talk about some advice for junior folks, I'm curious if you could give an example of how much money have you saved? Don't name names, but how much have you saved projects? What are some success stories that, because we're talking billions of dollars and you've been implementing sort of your methodology for a long time now. What kind of ROI are we talking about for that you've seen personally on these
It,
projects?
it can be really stunning. There's a project that they're the non-operating partner, and their operating partner had a assurance company come in on the schedule and give them the P90, P10 ranges. And they said, we're on track here. And that non-operating partner wanted to assure that assurance. And so using the day one approach and the redistribution, I showed that bow wave of 3x on this one, because you can tease out trends too when you're looking at progress data. And you can say, look at this trend, it's very clear. This is what they've been doing. Okay, here's a P90. Let's say it's, just to keep it simple, in January. When you flatten out this bow wave, you can see how it's done, right? Yeah. You're actually going to finish this project in October, 10 months after the P90. And the project team balked at it. I found this stuff out later. But the commercial team, because they could see that direct link, they said, okay, yeah, we got to supply this product to this facility, and we've got to cover that gap if there's a gap. And they did. They bought the product at spot price, and I found out it saved them $200 million.
Wow.
And they were going to completely blow past that window because they weren't quite sure what was going on. That's a commercial decision that I only found out fairly recently how much it was. I kind of estimated 50 million, but I didn't know it was that much. You got when I was with that, just from a contract perspective, when we were driving a levee there was a 5-mile long levee in New Orleans post Katrina. It's piles, that's your driving force. And we had 6 rigs, 3 rigs per heading. It was a really cool concept these guys created with this. They call it a batter as a frame instead of just hanging a pile off the rig as a framework. And they could run both rigs on the same side of the levee. Everything was a lot cleaner. But they got off to a slow start. They thought they were fine. But what happens when you get off to a slow start, and this is another adage you got to keep in mind as a planner, is early starts matter, because what happens if you miss those starts, you start to get that compression. And so these guys kind of did their back of the math calculation when they got going. They saw that they were getting 21, 22 piles per rig. And I couldn't get their attention. But once I showed them that math that we've been talking about, and that 14 was your average, and you're going to be 2 months late on and so you're going to get 10 million in liquidated damages, which for that project was devastating. They hired a subcontractor once they saw it in that manner, and with weeks to spare. So that's a success story where they were going to, again, blow past that window where that hiring of the sub could have saved them. With that, when you're flattening out a bow wave, if you have a lot of projects you have to get the product, it's a module especially, that site's expecting it. You might have barges in line, ships, heavy lift vessels that you just can't change. So you got to get the module out. If it's halfway done, sorry, ship loose. The rest of it, it's going to the site. And so if you're looking at carryover, especially if you're in this part of the world and it's going to a very expensive part, you're paying $7 an hour here and it's going to be $250 an hour there. You can really show an impact. In this director had not signed a craft incentive bonus that everybody wanted him to sign. It was $5 million. As soon as he saw that carryover bow wave and that flattening, and okay, I can't argue with this guy. We're going to have 300,000 hours spill up to this area of the world that we're not ready for. And plus it's going to cost us $60 million. Well, yeah, let's sign this. And he signed it that week. And they'd been trying to push this, and it was denied. And it was like a dead issue, and they were frustrated, but they couldn't sway his brain based on variances. And so And then the module yard, like I said, if what's a few months on a module yard worth? It's it's substantial, and
Yeah.
I mean on an LNG train. So yeah, I'd encourage anybody on a project, if you have the ear of the decision maker and you have the data, if you dabble in this redistribution off to the side and you can show them a different view, it shakes people into action. And you might have some of these wins that I've had, and I hope you do.
Well, so how would, like, shifting up a little bit, let's say I'm a student or a career shifter. I just heard you say, hey, I saving 200 million bucks. You're obviously a very skilled project planner, worked on the owner side, like been in the trenches, all those things. What advice would you give to someone that's early career, that wants to kind of get to your level?
Hmm. For one, know what you want. That no card is important. So get really clear about what do you want out of your career and what kind of lights you up a bit. And but if that lights you up to be on the owner's side and that's what you would like to do, then you got to get the attention of the owner in a way that is politically, you don't want to hurt the people that are paying you. So if you, you but you have to, I guess the biggest advice would be to get obviously out of the office. A lot of being mobile it's extremely important to say yes. So if there's an opportunity and somebody wants you to go, you may not fall in love with it right away. It may not be where you want to go. I'm a sailor. I love wind. I love water. Malaysia has no wind and no sailing. And so it can be a little bit of not every move you're going to make is going to be sunshine and roses. And like I said, I wanted to drive out of that Colorado job. This is visceral. Like, do I have to take this exit again? But out of that was born the impact, the ideas that I've carried with me. So for one, if it's hard, don't leave. Go through the hard and have an idea of what you want, and just try to get the most accurate answer of the truth out to the people that can make a difference, and you'll start to make a name for yourself and find out what you're really good at, I had a manager once, and the idea was we're going to bolster your weaknesses. And this isn't binary. I'm not saying don't ever work on anything that's a weakness. Obviously, I'm taking communication and speaking classes, but you need to find out what you're really good at and just quadruple down on that. And so whatever is in the project world that you love, that comes as natural as breathing, go all in on that, and you're probably going to do pretty good.
That's good advice, particularly with AI. If AI is a force multiplier, right, then
yeah,
it'd be far better to multiply your activities
idea.
on something you love.
I've got an idea with AI that's kind of fresh, and I think your most valuable skill in the world of AI is your ability to imagine and create. And so you need to create. You can't be a busybody in the new world. I get up an hour early every morning and I'm quiet. And there's a book, Transurfing Reality, he calls it knocking at the door of heaven and listening to the stars rustle. But if you're quiet and you imagine that your project, your work, and ideas are going to come to you that would never come from AI. And then you use AI to execute wildly on those ideas. But you have to not be a meeting man or woman, meeting to meeting to meeting. I've fallen into that trap. You got to have time to think. And as a planner, especially, if you're not carving out time to really soak in what's happening, like that module yard, the most important thing I did on that yard wasn't counting pipe spools, although I did that every week. It was one day I went and sat in the shade of a fence in this massive yard, and I just watched this module for almost 2 hours. And I thought, okay, these guys are not taking the schedule out there and telling them that they need to put pipe here on level 3. They're just doing the work. They probably have a plan, but it's far more granular. So how do I tell the project team when this module is going to get done? And that's when one of those buttons clicked. It wasn't because I was in a meeting and busy. It's because I was sitting under the shade watching and thinking that the idea of the progress system, and that's the real picture of this module. So let me just show that to the decision maker. So you got to have time to think. That's in the world of AI, time to think. And like I was telling my business partner, that 2-hour walk in the woods might be more valuable than 2 months of actively working if you can come up with an idea. And the wonderful thing about AI is you can execute so fast now.
Yeah. This gets it. Okay, I want to hit you with this, Travis. I'm curious what you think, but I have a complaint about timesheets and time writing in general related to what you just said, which is that I think they're a lie when it comes to knowledge workers. I think timesheets are a complete lie because they assume that time is fungible. I don't think you can sum up those hours. So if I sum up the Travis shade in the tree moment and I just add it to whatever random meeting you had over there, and then like those don't sum. They have,
No, they don't.
They're vastly different. And that's why I've always thought that time accounting for knowledge work in particular, but maybe for a lot of things, is fundamentally flawed. And there's been a push over the last decade or two to really, like SAP, all these systems, they've really pushed down this time writing concept. And I think it's actually hurting businesses and shifting people's perspective in the wrong direction. Like people get these numbers that summed up brilliant ideas with random meetings and other stupid things, time coded into different categories. But I fundamentally question whether you can actually even have a category that sums things when they're orthogonal things. They're on different number lines, man, if that makes any sense.
Okay, Orion, if somebody's listened this far, they're going to hear the truth. It's something that I'm actually uncomfortable to talk about. I don't put this on LinkedIn, but I viscerally dislike that time writing. And okay, take that Wheatstone project. Here I am halfway around the world getting paid more money than I've ever made. And I set that system up, a little work to set it up. After that, the contractor did the updating. I had the system. I worked probably 30 minutes a week, 45 minutes a week max. And I shifted the entire trajectory of that train of one of the biggest LNG. I mean, I wasn't the only one. Obviously, there's other people, but that little component was worth 2 or 3 months of strategy on that refinery project. Again, the contractor did the work. They're doing stuff they're already doing. But yeah, the knowledge work is not a linear, and we're not digging ditches here. You can come up with some project saving insight in 15 minutes that's going to save that job, or a system that's very easy and low maintenance to update, but it's keeping everybody on their toes. And you just have to be comfortable with not working so hard and thinking that your worth is coming from the work. That's hard to do. You have to have a little confidence in your skill set and your ideas. Because if you are uncomfortable with that, you're going to work yourself to the bone. You're going to go from meeting to meeting and jump around, and you're not going to get those insights. And you're going to treat your time, like you're saying, like a time writer, and you're going to just totally suck the lifeblood out of what your real value. It's horrible, and hopefully one of these days we're going to figure out a way around it.
And maybe that's where like scheduling time for yourself to think is probably where, like you were saying, that's where the magic happens. And it's also requires self-assurance that your thoughts are valuable. So maybe that's a little bit of advice that people should have faith in themselves to give them that time. because they probably are more brilliant than they realize.
They are, and we all are, because we all have access to this. If you just give yourself stillness, you're going to have access to an infinite world of knowledge that will surprise you, but you have to be still, and you can't be bumping around meeting to meeting. I think project meetings have completely gone overboard, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, like, do you have any books, podcasts, people you follow that kind of helped influence your thinking on stuff? You mentioned reality transurfing. That sounds like an interesting book.
Yeah, that's the idea of the essence of where you want to go, and keeping that in your mind, and it's been really enlightening to me. But I wrote some down here. The Alchemist is always a great read for people to kind of understand the journey of just there's a lot of wisdom within The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And then I just finished a book called The Alter Ego Effect about how you can channel if you find say a project person or somebody that you really want to emulate, you can do what a lot of sports figures do and just have an alter ego that you channel into your work, and it can create long-term benefits and kickstart your development. That's one. And yeah, that's it. I've listened to Ayn Rand books, the Fountainhead. Okay, that's a good one. Okay, let's stop there.
Fountainhead.
I knew nothing about Ayn Rand, and I heard Mark Cuban say one of his top most influential books, Ayn Rand, The Fountainhead. And so I think we all should read that and think of ourselves. I mean, I'm definitely no Howard Rourke, okay, who's the completely independent architect who, committees be damned, he's going to do whatever he wants because he knows in his gut that's what and if he can't do that, if he can't express his art in the way that he wants, he just backs out, and he'll go homeless. He'll go work in the granite quarry before he builds a massive skyscraper from a committee. And then you have Peter Keating, who does the complete will of the masses. And those are the two polar opposites. And so hopefully I'm not a Peter Keating, and I wish I was more of a Howard Rourke, but that might give people the ideas of, okay, when you read that, you get inspired to take a little more boldness and unique ideas. So that's a really good book, but it's long. Yeah, listen to it while you're flying or driving or commuting.
Cool. You've added to my list. I've got a couple on there that I need to check out. Thanks for that, Brenda. What about professional associations? Do you follow any of those? And
we have the AAC, obviously.
yeah.
I've sat for and passed the EVP exam and the PSP exam. I've let them lapse, partly because for a while there I was speaking out against SPIs, and I've kind of calmed down my rhetoric, and from coaching for my business partner, Travis, you don't need to be against this. You need to be for the truth and the redistribution. You don't have to be against this stuff. So he has a very valid point, but I thought, because I don't necessarily practice a lot of those, but yeah, I got off on a tangent. AAC, I've spoken at a few of their meetings and gone to a few of their meetings, and they have wonderful publications on forensic schedule analysis. If you ever get into a claim situation and you have to go off of the established order, you can fall back on that.
Yeah, they have some pretty good, the recommended practices at AACE are pretty well built out. If you just don't have any context for something, it's a great reference. Can be helpful.
Yeah, I can get you started.
And a
little more Howard Rourke. I'm not a joiner, so not really much into that kind of stuff so much.
Yeah, I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I really appreciate that ISO and AACE have put down pen to paper on a bunch of this stuff, but I am such a contrarian. Like, I do find myself oftentimes, wanting to add to it, and Yeah, but someone's got to do it. Someone's got to take the hit and at least publish something. And then,
It takes guts to do that.
yeah.
For good stuff and practice and take some hits for it. So appreciated all that.
Well, before we close out, can I ask if people want to connect with you, or they want to learn more about Day One Model? Someone wants to work with you, call you in on a project. Like, how would they do that?
You can just find me on LinkedIn, Travis Arlitt. That's I think my only social media outlet right now. And go to www.dayonemodel.com or go to goforward.dayonemodel.com, and you can get that free app and look at some examples and kind of get your head around the idea of forward redistribution and convert one of your own charts into that view in 30 minutes or so. And yeah, just always trying to keep LinkedIn a little fresh and posting these ideas.
Cool. Well, Travis, thank you so much for taking time to come on. We had a great chat. I really enjoyed learning about the Day One Model. I like the frame execution realism, sharing your owner's perspective. I just really appreciate you coming on board, giving us a look at how to get closer to reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm incredibly glad that you reached out.
Awesome. Well, if anyone wants to learn more about Travis, down below in the comments, we will be dropping his links, information, and of course, you can always go to the Megaprojects podcast.com to check out and learn more.
Thank you.